Hi, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get today's webinar started. Again, my name is Shahab Kaviani, and I'm the co-founder and chief marketing officer of Onevest. I'm very excited to welcome our guest, Chris Ye, who is the co-author of newly released book, The Alliance, Managing Talent in the Networked Age, co-authored by Reid Hoffman. We're going to run this webinar for about 45 minutes and save the remaining 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. Please go ahead and drop in your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll be curating them along the way, and then we'll be reading those questions out at the end of the webinar. So please feel free to drop in questions along the way. A quick disclaimer before we get into today's presentation. Onevest is a equity crowdfunding platform. We do work directly with our partner WealthForge, our broker-dealer partner, and Onevest, however, is not a registered broker-dealer ourselves. Please, I'm going to leave you about 15 seconds to quickly look at this disclaimer. Great. So a little bit about myself. Again, I'm the co-founder and chief marketing officer of Onevest. I've been working as a co-founder with my own startups for about 10 years. And prior to Onevest, I was working on Co-Founders Lab, which is a co-founder matching service. It's turned out now to be one of the very largest founder networks in the world for co-founder matching. And prior to that, I was working with a cloud collaboration software company, which I co-founded and operated for almost 8 years. And I've been involved with raising capital and building teams, and I'm very excited to tell you about a little bit about our guest, Chris Ye. And I'm going to hand it over to Chris to introduce himself. Chris, I'll go ahead and hand the control over to you.
Thank you. Much appreciated, and really glad to be here with you guys today. Let me go ahead and give you a little bit of background about myself. Obviously, the most relevant thing is that I am the co-author of The Alliance. It is, in fact, a New York Times bestseller, so we're very proud of that. The interest I have in startups really stems to the beginning of my career. I got started in the startup world in 1995, and I've been there ever since. And I've founded, invested, or advised over 50 different startups, including Ustream. It's funny because before the webinar started, I actually had my speakers turned off, so I didn't realize I was on. And the team over at Onevest heard me actually discussing with an entrepreneur a potential investment. So very entertaining in that sense. I do have the classic sort of background of a startup guy. I went to Stanford as an undergraduate. I have an engineering degree as well as a creative writing degree, and I got my business school MBA from Harvard Business School, although I try to be quiet about that these days. So the big question that we have today is hiring and relationships between employers and employees. And the way we typically like to think about the relationship between employers and employees, especially as a founder, is, you know what, we're like a family. We really love each other, we respect each other, we work together, we pull together, and we're going to do great things together. And that is a very noble goal. It's a very noble vision that people have. But unfortunately, the reality of the relationship, especially these days, is that the relationship tends to fall back on what I would call contractual grounds. They're employment relationships. Everyone is an at-will employee. Everyone could be fired at any time for any reason or for no reason at all. And as a result of the conflict between the soaring rhetoric and the painful reality, ultimately, I feel like the relationship between employers and employees in today's world, especially at startups, ends up being broken. So let's talk about how those relationships have evolved over time. I mentioned that startup often feels like a family. And the notion of family is deeply embedded in how we think about work. If you think about the description of a family with the parents representing the management, with the employees representing the children, the whole idea the whole metaphor encodes a whole set of assumptions. And during the course of the 20th century, a lot of those times, those assumptions were correct. Big companies like IBM or General Motors would treat their employees like family. They would do everything for them. They would guarantee them a job. They would never lay anybody off. And in return, they expected the kind of loyalty we grant to our family members. We often say, well, I may not like him, so I may not like him that much, but he's family, and I'm going to stick with him. And family is really fundamentally premised on this notion of undying loyalty. No matter what, we're all a family. We're always going to stick together. I'm always going to make sure you have a job. You're always going to be loyal and work for me. But as times changed, most of you probably realize this is no longer the case. In fact, what we have is pretty much the exact opposite. As we began to have technology, globalization, the rise of shareholder capitalism, we really migrated towards a contractual notion of the employer-employee relationship. And my fellow co-authors and I often like to summarize this by looking at the history of one particular company, General Electric. In 1962, the CEO of General Electric said that our number one concern is the job security of our employees. Number one concern, not shareholder value, not growth in the marketplace, not market share, not even our customers, the job security of our employees. Well, fast forward to the Jack Welch era, and Jack Welch said, all of our employees are on one-day contracts. If they don't produce today, they're going to hit the bricks tomorrow. And to follow it up, people said, well, Jack, what about loyalty? What about those notions, the importance of the employee job security? And he said, listen, you want loyalty? Get a dog. So one of the interesting questions I like to ask audiences is, how many years have you worked at your current company? Now, in your cases, you guys are primarily founders, so perhaps you haven't worked at your particular company that long, but even before then, think back to your previous jobs. Were there a lot of folks around who'd worked there for 30, 40 years? In today's world, most professionals are spending shorter and shorter periods at companies, and it is extremely rare to find someone who spends their entire career at a company. So the question is, we have to reflect this new reality. The notion of lifetime employment and everything's like a family obviously is unrealistic. But on the other hand, this notion of one-day contracts seems very cold, and in fact isn't very good for either the company or the employees. If you think about it, when you work at a job, are you instantly productive from day one? No, there's some time period to learn the ropes, understand the business, come up to speed, develop relationships. It's only after you've been at the company for some period of time that you're truly productive. Similarly, from the company's standpoint, it's investing in you early on, whether it be with training or what have you. It really wants you around long enough to reap the benefits. And both parties benefit more if you've been in an organization for long enough to really make some significant changes and some significant contributions. So the alliance is all about saying, listen, we've got the wrong metaphors. Whether we're talking about people as family or talking about people as free agents, those are actually not correct descriptions of how work works today. And if we change the metaphor from family or free agent to allies and the alliance, we'll actually be able to do a better job of organizing the way that we work together. Now, what is an alliance? Well, if you think about the term alliance, oftentimes when I think about it, I think about it historically. If you look at the history of Europe, alliances were very important. So, for example, when Napoleon was attempting to conquer Europe, an alliance formed between the British, the Prussians, and the Russians to combat Napoleon's attempt at conquest. In World War II, Britain and France and the United States and the Soviet Union were allies against Nazi Germany. Now, what does an alliance mean? Well, an alliance is a voluntary agreement between two independent and autonomous parties to go after a common goal. Let's unpack that a little bit. What are some of the implications of that? Well, two independent and autonomous parties. Just by entering into a relationship, you're not giving up your own sense of sovereignty. So if the United States and Britain are uniting to fight Hitler, it's not like all of a sudden Winston Churchill reports to Franklin Roosevelt and the Queen is now a senator from Michigan. In fact, the two governments remain separate. The two entities remain separate, coordinated around a common goal. But the same token, even though the two countries are not uniting, it's also not the case that they just say, well, we know we both want to fight Hitler, so why don't you do what you think makes sense to fight Hitler, and I'll do what I think makes sense to fight Hitler, and everything will work out. No, it's a coordinated effort where you define a mutual objective, a mutual mission, and then you carefully figure out what each party is going to contribute and ultimately what each party is going to get out of it. That is an alliance, and that is the way that as a founder, you can begin to build relationships with your key early employees to really make them as productive as possible. Now, one of the examples I like to use, both of alliance and how you can go wrong, is the example of John Lasseter of Pixar and Disney. So many of you have probably heard of John Lasseter's name. In case you haven't, you've certainly heard of his works. He's the director of Toy Story and A Bug's Life, and is the creative mind behind Pixar and their long string of vastly successful movies, with the possible exception of Cars 2. John Lasseter is now Disney's chief creative officer, but that's not the first time he worked for Disney. In fact, John Lasseter, when he was growing up, dreamed of nothing more than working for Disney. His sole goal in life, from the time he was a child, was to work at the Walt Disney Company and work on animated films. In fact, he was so into Disney that as a teenager, he worked at Disneyland as one of the Jungle Cruise guides, wearing the hat and delivering the patter and everything else. He wanted to be close to Disney so much that he got a job ferrying around tourists in the hot August sun of Disneyland. And lo and behold, John Lasseter achieved his dream. He was hired by Disney as an animator and got to work at Disney, was able to fulfill his lifelong dream. Now, one day, John Lasseter was at a conference that was happening locally, and he saw a demonstration on computer-generated animation. And he said, wow, that's amazing. Right? Why should everything be done with a bunch of people drawing by hand? That's really inefficient. Computers are getting more and more powerful. That's really the future of animation. I know. I'm going to go pitch my bosses on doing computer-generated animation. And he went to his bosses at Disney. He told them about what he saw, and he said, I've got this great idea. We should do computer-generated animated films. And his bosses said, oh, that's very interesting, John. John went back to his desk. And a few minutes later, he got a phone call. John, you're fired. Clean out your stuff and get out of here by the end of the day. We can't have you wasting time on things like this. So John Lasseter, his lifelong dream, evaporated in an instant because he wanted to help the Disney company, and he suggested something that he thought was really relevant. Well, the way the story ends, of course, is that John Lasseter ended up meeting up with the folks at Pixar. He was hired as their first animator. He worked on their long string of award-winning shorts, and then ultimately on Toy Story and various other movies. And Pixar became the massive success that it did at the same time that Disney's own animation studio was really falling into decline in the post-Lion King years. And ultimately, Disney decided that they had to acquire John Lasseter and Pixar, and they paid something on the order of $7 billion for that privilege. Now remember, John Lasseter is somebody who dreamed of nothing more than being an animator for Disney and creating films for Disney. And sure enough, that's the way it ended up. But because Disney didn't see him as an ally, Disney didn't respect his contributions, Disney didn't say, listen, you know what, you can have ideas too, they ended up paying a terrible price. And that's the sort of thing that doesn't just happen to big companies. It's the sort of thing that happens to startups as well. It is absolutely the case that, maybe some folks say, you know what, I think video online would make a great business. Why don't we do that? And they end up leaving their company and joining and creating a startup called YouTube and selling it for $1.7 billion. So as a founder, the key question is, how can you build the kind of relationship where if you have a John Lasseter on your staff, you're able to leverage his entrepreneurial ambitions and energy and genius on behalf of your company rather than forcing him to go start his own. Now, I come from Silicon Valley, and many people believe that Silicon Valley is the center of innovation. We build all these amazing products ranging from Apple's phones to Google's search devices and everything in between. And Silicon Valley is known as something that is synonymous with innovation. But what is it that makes Silicon Valley innovative? Well, maybe it's having Stanford University right there. So many smart computer scientists being turned out. But you know what? There are lots of other smart computer scientists at MIT, CMU, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Or maybe it's all that stuff we read about, the fancy slides and sleeping pods and catered chefs. Maybe that's what makes Silicon Valley so productive. But that's really what I call cargo cult capitalism. Mistaking something that's correlated for the actual cause. In fact, the key to the innovation in Silicon Valley is the people and the way in which ultimately startups, oftentimes by accident, have found themselves forming alliances with their employees. Because of their ability to recruit, manage, and retain entrepreneurial employees, Silicon Valley startups have been able to change the world. Your startup will be looking to recruit, manage, and retain these entrepreneurial employees. No matter how brilliant you are as an inventor, as an entrepreneur, innovation can't just come from you. Innovation has to come from building a great team. Steve Jobs, perhaps the greatest business genius of our time, did not work alone. Worked with Johnny Ive for design. Worked with so many other members of the team. Tony Fadell, who later created Nest to create the iPod. Steve Jobs understood that the key was recruiting wonderful, amazing talent, figuring out how to get out of their way, and figuring out how to keep them long enough to actually build a remarkable success. And if you look at Apple today, most of those senior executives have actually been at that company for 10 plus years. So even though people think that Silicon Valley is all about quickly hopping jobs, going from place to place, the great companies do find ways to hang on to their people, and they do it by forming these alliances. So, all right, that sounds great. I want to form an alliance with my employees. How do I actually do it? Do I just tell them, hey, we're an alliance now, let's go? No. The book, The Alliance, Managing Talent in the Networked Age, lays out a complete framework for how you do it. And one of the key elements of this framework is a concept we call tours of duty. So the key to the tour of duty is not that it is time limited, although that is part of it. The key is that the tour of duty has a very clear statement of the mutual goals. So when you have a tour of duty in the military, you have a very specific assignment. We are going to make this city in Iraq safe, or we're going to deploy this base. The same thing happens in the startup world. Maybe somebody is brought on board as a product manager to launch a specific new product, or somebody is sent out to China to open a new office. The key is that tour of duty has a very clear mission. And that mission, if accomplished, is going to meet the mutual goals, the goals of both the employee and the employer. And by building that kind of relationship where there's a very clear mission and where accomplishing that mission helps both parties, you're able to actually build the kind of trust that's been missing from the employer-employee relationship. There's a great expression that trust is about commitments that are fulfilled. You don't trust someone just because they say, trust me. In fact, in many cases, you're going to trust someone less when they say, trust me, especially if they're Donald Trump. Trust is built when people make commitments and then consistently meet them. And the way that has to work is you actually have to make commitments. You have to be very clear about what people are committing to, and then you have to be very clear about whether those commitments are met. And having an explicit mission and having an explicit set of mutual goals is the way you build that trust. When an employee has done a tour of duty and accomplished a mission, and it has benefited that employee and the employer, that builds that bond of trust between employee and employer, or employee and manager. We've done something together. Think about the kind of trust that is built between soldiers in times of war. Because they accomplished the mission together, they are now a band of brothers, and they will work together in the future even better than before. And the key is ultimately the goal of these tours of duty is transformation. We want a tour of duty to be something that is transformational for both the employee and the company. In the case of a startup, that's actually fairly easy. You guys might be 2 or 3 people in a garage right now, and 4 or 5 years from now, you want to be a thriving company. If your employee accomplishes that mission, they've clearly helped you transform the startup. But at the same time, if somebody has been head of product at a wildly successful startup, that's transformed their career. Maybe they started off as somebody who just had some work experience, but after they built Facebook or LinkedIn or what have you, that suddenly makes them a hot commodity. One of the examples we use in the book is of an executive at LinkedIn named David Hahn. He actually spent 9 years at LinkedIn on a variety of different tours of duty. He came to LinkedIn as a young guy, just fresh out of school, barely any experience, and he left LinkedIn after 9 years after having run a business unit that was responsible for billions in revenue and is now one of the hottest executive prospects in Silicon Valley. He's an executive in residence at Greylock and will undoubtedly go on to become CEO of a wildly successful company. His career is completely transformed, but it wasn't a free ride for him, right? He is able to, in the course of his tours of duty at LinkedIn, help them build $1 billion business. So ultimately, it is a mutual goal of transformation for the better. And as a manager, as a founder, the pitch you need to make to your employees is, I am going to help you transform your career. Because I have been in the startup world for a long time, and I've sat where you guys sit. You can't go to an employee and say, I'm going to pay you more than Google or I'm going to pay you more than Facebook. You don't have that amount of money. And you can hold out for them the possibility that the company is going to be worth a colossal amount of money someday. But the statistics are against you. Even a venture-backed company has only about a 10% chance of being one of these amazing successes. The odds are long against the equity being worth this colossal amount of money. But any startup, even if it's ultimately not successful, can offer the opportunity to transform the career. By the same token, maybe some of you are on this call because you're looking for a co-founder. You're looking to join a company. Maybe you're not the founder yet. Well, one of the best ways to market yourself to a company is to say, I'm going to help you transform the company. I'm going to paint a picture of how this company is going to be different because I join it. It's not about saying, I'm awesome, I went to this school, I have this experience. Those are fine, but that's acting as though you're applying to graduate school. Instead, the real way to sell yourself to a company is say, here's how I'm going to transform your business. You're here at point A today. If you hire me, I will get you to point B, and here's how I'm going to get you to point B. Now, let's say you build this relationship. You build a relationship based on trust. You have multiple tours of duty. You transform the company. It's all fantastic. But what happens when someday that employee says, you know what? I want to go ahead and run my own show. And I know that the job of founder CEO is taken at this company. I need to strike out on my own. What do you do? How do you then continue that relationship? Well, one of the things I like to point out is this on this slide, all these different companies. Obviously, many of them are enormously valuable. LinkedIn, tens of billions. Tesla, tens of billions. Yelp, billions. Yammer, YouTube, sold for billions of dollars. What all these companies have in common is that they are all founded by alumni of PayPal. Now, PayPal was itself a big success. Sold to eBay for $1.5 billion. It was the first thing that helped make the fortune of Peter Thiel and Reid Hoffman and David Sachs and many others. But after PayPal was sold to eBay, one of the funny things is eBay said, you know what, we're buying this business, but we don't really need to hang on to all these people. We've got the golden goose, the business itself. All these other guys, they're kind of troublemakers. I don't know if they're really going to add much value. Let's not work hard to keep them around. So all those troublemakers went off and started companies that are easily collectively worth 10, 20, 30 times the amount of eBay. And how much benefit has eBay reaped from all those companies? Zero. What this illustrates is the incredible power of corporate alumni relationships. Just because somebody has decided that they need to leave your organization doesn't mean that you have to give up and stop generating value from that relationship. In fact, that relationship can continue. Now, the interesting thing about the corporate alumni relationship is that this is actually something that the alumni themselves want. This is not some sort of trick on the part of the company. This is not self-serving. In fact, employees want this kind of relationship. Thanks to the fact that Reed is the founder of LinkedIn, we were able to get some interesting data out of LinkedIn's data scientists. 98% of the Fortune 500 have corporate alumni groups on LinkedIn. And yet, the vast majority of those corporate alumni groups are organized by alumni themselves and have no official standing with the company. So people are so intent on their corporate alumni status that they actually take their own time and money and build these alumni groups. And the company, meanwhile, reaps none of the benefit. That to us is kind of crazy. So we believe that one of the key elements of the alliance is to continue that alliance after the employment relationship ends by building a corporate alumni relationship. As a founder, as a manager, if your company becomes successful, you will grow and eventually people will leave, right? It's not like a family in the sense of nobody ever leaves home. In fact, that would be a very bad kind of family. But rather, it is a family in the sense that there continues to be a relationship of trust and respect and affection that persists even after that employment relationship is over. So when you get to an exit interview with an employee who's leaving to start their own company, the answer is, listen, it's not that you're dead to us, it's that we want to welcome you to our corporate alumni group. If you are someone who has helped build this company, we want to continue that relationship. And by the way, you probably want to continue that relationship too. It's not the case that there's no benefit for the employee. In fact, there's a reason why employees are forming these corporate alumni groups. It's because they have these relationships that they've built with their peers, their managers, their direct reports that they want to continue to leverage throughout their entire career. And participating in the alumni group and helping the company is actually helpful to the employee. Ultimately, a lot of our reputation and branding as individuals stems from the companies that we've worked with and stems from their success. Think of all the people who get a lot of credit for being ex-Google employees. It says a couple of things. It says that they're smart because they pass through Google's hiring filter, but they'd also get a tremendous amount of brand recognition simply from having been part of something successful. And those alumni ought to try to protect the standing of Google in the marketplace and probably will find ways to do so. Much like I, as an alumnus of Stanford University, support the school's brand, actually contribute to the school as an alumni donor because I want to see the school continue to thrive. It is a symbiotic relationship where we continue to help each other even though it's been 20 years since I was a student. So how do you make change in your organization? What do you do as the founder in order to take advantage of the concepts of the alliance? Well, there's a lot of different strategies that you can employ. One of them is aligning the employee's values and career aspirations with the company. When you have an open and honest conversation about the mission, when you have an open and honest conversation about values and aspirations, you can make sure that there's actually a very good fit. And that can take place at the hiring level as well as the ongoing management of the employees. And we talk a lot in the book about the different strategies for uncovering those values and being able to talk about them in a compelling way. One of the things that we talk about in a piece that's independent of the book is the right of first conversation, how by having an open and honest relationship with an employee where you acknowledge that they might leave, it opens the door for you to say, if you're thinking about leaving, come and talk to me first because I want to be able to address the issues that you have. And if you really have issues where you need to be somewhere else, i.e. you want to run your own company and I'm the founder CEO, let's see what I can do to help you achieve those dreams because we are allies. It's not purely an employment relationship. We have an ongoing relationship where we pull for each other. Should all employees be welcome to the alumni network? Hey, what if somebody goes to a competitor? What if somebody sues the company? And we talk about the policies we think you should have in place, including making sure that people are in good standing as alumni, as well as having a separate distinguished alumni network for people who have really helped the company or have really achieved remarkable things afterwards. And finally, how do you retain your entrepreneurial employees? How do you make sure that the John Lasseters of your company don't leave? And the answer ultimately is finding a tour of duty that really lines up with those entrepreneurial energies. Most people are entrepreneurial, but many of them don't actually want to go through the things that you guys are going through. Raising money, filling out paperwork, doing payroll, all these things are hard. And when you can offer people the opportunity to actually fulfill their entrepreneurial ambitions and energy without all that hassle, oftentimes it's possible to retain people a lot longer than you think. We cover these topics and many more in the book, The Alliance, Managing Talent in the Networked Age. So what I would like to leave you with is the notion of our idealized vision of the employer-employee relationship. I believe that it is possible for there to be an employer-employee relationship or a founder-employee relationship which is based on trust and honesty and respect, where you do have the kind of positive relationship that we all would love to see. The difference is you're not going to do that by pretending that you're a family when you're not. And you're not going to do that by asking everyone to be a free agent. You're going to do that by building alliances with people that you really respect and want a part of your company. So, in terms of next steps that you can take from here, obviously, would love to see you buy the book, The Alliance, Managing Talent in the Networked Age. You can find out more about the book at theallianceframework.com, including links to purchase on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. We also have a link to our LinkedIn group where people are discussing these issues, so you can communicate and connect with your peers. And I, as an author, as well as some of the other authors, poke our heads in and respond to those questions. And of course, Onevest is an outstanding organization. I'll turn it back over and let you talk about the other things that you can do with Onevest.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. That was fantastic. I mean, it's a really powerful concept, and I sort of I plan on reading the book to really crystallize this. But I want to just share a few things that really hit home for me, and then we're gonna open this up to questions. The reason that we teamed up with Chris Ye on this webinar is that we are working with close to 50,000 founders in our community who are now hiring their second and third and fourth employees, and it's very costly for a startup to be able to come up with those funds. But the next thing is to really motivate them and keep them around and form these alliances. So hopefully, for some of our later stage companies, you found this valuable. A couple of really interesting things was I love the PayPal mafia story. Kind of hear about that history, but seeing all those logos really hit home for me. I also have to share a personal story because this just happened last night. I happened to be invited to an alumni event from my last startup that I co-founded, HyperOffice, and there was probably they had our 30 employees there, and we sold a part of the business, but another part is still operating, and it was great. I saw not only the people who are still there, but other alumni who weren't co-founders that felt such an attachment to the company and this joint mission that we embarked upon. And it was really a warm gathering. People were trying to find ways to help each other and give advice, and so I really experienced that firsthand, and we hope to continue to do that with Onevest. So now I'd like to open it up to some questions. So we're going to go ahead and take our first question, who comes from Kingsley. And Kingsley says, I'm a budding entrepreneur with great ideas but zero budget for recruiting. As an early stage company, how can I effectively recruit a team if I don't have the funds to pay them? Well, this is sort of a softball for Co-Founders Lab, so I'll take that one here. So a co-founders lab is a community of close to 40,000 entrepreneurs who want to join startups, they either have an idea or looking to be part of an idea. So that's really a fantastic place. It's a free service. You can upgrade to pro membership to increase your chances, but it's a great service to take advantage of. And then we host events where you can meet co-founders across 35 cities in the United States and about 5 cities overseas. So take advantage of the free online networking service and the events. The other two questions, Kingsley, I'm going to move on. We have a lot of questions here because your follow-up 2 questions or 3 questions are well answered in a webinar we hold called Fundraising 101. So I encourage you to go to onevest.com and click at the bottom, at the footer, you'll see an events link, and check out one of our upcoming webinars there. This next question is from Patrick. Patrick asks, do you think that mutual goals can change all the time in a startup? And Chris, we're going to enable you here. If you can, maybe you could take that one.
Sure. Let me see if I can get my webcam to appropriately work. So that's an excellent question, because when you're talking about startups, there is a lot of flux. Things can change quite a bit. And it's difficult to say, oh, well, we have you starting off on this mission, but everything's changed. So what we do recommend is, it's definitely the case that when you have a tour of duty, it's not like, oh, we've defined the tour of duty, now you have to stick with it exactly as we previously defined it. In fact, that's the role of the manager, to actually do regular check-ins and discuss with employees, how are things going? Does the tour of duty still make sense? Is this mission still a go? And as a result, in startups, I think it's even more important than in large companies for managers to play an active role. Oftentimes, we think of managers in startups as playing a lesser role than managers in big companies. Like, oh, we're all individual contributors, we're all moving in the right direction, we all know what to do, let's move fast and break things. In fact, because of the rapid changes that are possible in a startup, it's even more important for managers to really do those regular check-ins.
Great, thank you, Chris. I'm going to read the next question that comes in from Michael. And Michael asks, how do you form an alliance with founders who are currently also working on different projects? I think what you're asking there, Michael, is that you have a startup, you have let's say three co-founders in total, and each of those founders is also working on another startup. If that is the case, Chris, I'll let you chime in here, but I think if that is the case, that's not a very good formula. I think in a startup, you need to have your whole body and mind and heart and sweat and soul, and when you're going to when you wake up to putting your head on the pillow to go to sleep, you have to be thinking about that startup, and you have to be thinking about one mission. I mean, people in the military that are defending our liberties in the Middle East these days don't come home and go find another battle in some other faraway country. They fight one mission at a time. So I think if I misunderstood the question to say that you have founder friends and you each are working on your own separate startups, I think there are skills that you can be sharing. I have most of my friends now are founders, and we're constantly sharing advice with one another and helping to kind of think through common challenges that we're faced with in our business. And so you can really create a peer board, if you will. So there are large companies have board of directors with advisors. Think of your startup where you can surround yourself with a virtual board, and you can, on a regular basis with some discipline, really have a lot of knowledge transfer that happens there. Chris, would you like to add something to that, to Michael's question?
Sure. I think that the other possible interpretation of the question is, how do you deal with a startup where you may be full-time, but you have co-founders who are still working day jobs, maybe not at another startup, but maybe at a large company, because not everyone is either independently wealthy or has no expenses and can work for free. And the key here is, again, the focus on the open and honest conversation. it is often the case, and I've seen it a lot of times, where let's say one co-founder is still working a day job and the other ones aren't. Resentment can build up because people don't want to talk about that fact. People don't want to talk about the fact that, hey, you're less committed than I am. But you need to have that conversation, because if you don't have that conversation, that resentment just builds up in the background and can poison the relationship. It's certainly the true that sometimes you have imperfect instruments, right? Not everyone has the ability to put together a dream team of people that can work on it full time right from the start. So you do have to deal with these kinds of situations. But the way to deal with them is to be very open, honest, and explicit about them, rather than sort of hoping for the best and trying to paper over differences.
Great, thank you. We're going to move on to the next question from Vivi, who asks, this is quite about maintaining relationships. How about when we look for a co-founder or first employee? How do we execute the strategy? Um, I'll take that for a moment. So the maintaining the relationship with a co-founder is something that we think a lot about, and this is like any other relationship, whether it's with your significant other, with your children, your best friends. It needs maintenance, and you have to constantly be working on it. And one of the things you want to provision for is that over the course of 3, 4, 5 years, you change as a person, and your priorities are changing. So you want to check in with each other and say, when we started this, our values were so and so. So we might say that, we want to create a culture where everyone's working really hard around the clock, and we're here till 8 p.m. if we need to be. And then next thing you know, somebody has a kid and they want to go drop them off at soccer practice in the middle of the week at 2 p.m. Now, their values are changing, their priorities are changing, but like Chris, you said, you don't want to let those things fester, because that could really create some turmoil. Don't walk over stuff. Really deal with the issues and say, hey, what I'm doing acceptable, and let's sort of refresh the values and goals of the company. So I think you're really checking in with each other that we're still headed in the same direction. These are the milestones we have for the company, and these are the personal things. So I do quite a bit of personal development outside of the company, where I'm going to conferences. So is that an acceptable thing? So we want to talk about that. Hey, we think that we want to invest money into you for taking classes, or sorry, we really don't accept people going out to conferences 3 times a month. Whatever those conversations are, but you want to talk about what's important for you while you're here, and making sure that we're meeting all of those concerns. So we start with employee concerns, and then we need to move on to our customer and our shareholder concerns. Chris, would you like to add to Vivi's question?
Sure. I'd just like to add an analogy that really helps me when thinking about these co-founder relationships. I think that we do often say it's kind of like a marriage, because you're going to be spending a colossal amount of time with this person. And when you get married, one of the things that's pretty important up front is to talk about the big issues openly and honestly. Hey, where are we going to live after we get married? What happens if you get a job offer in this city? What happens if I get a job offer in that city? What if we have kids? Who's going to do what when that happens? How are we going to raise them? Well, which church are we going to attend? Are we not going to go to a church? I don't know. These are all the kinds of things that's really important, and I think everyone intuitively understands needs to be discussed before they get married. And yet the co-founder relationship is very much like that. You go into it and you just basically sort of say, well, do you think the idea is cool? Yeah. What percentage you get? Okay. All right, we'll figure it all out from there. No, actually, you really need to think about, okay, what kind of company do we want to build together? Look forward a couple of years. What is this mission that we're on? What will you have gotten out of it besides the equity? What will I have gotten out of it? What will the company have gotten out of it? And it's such an important relationship, it doesn't make sense to just jump into it as you're eloping in Las Vegas.
Thank you, Chris. And for those of you who are members on cofounderslab.com, which is currently a separate brand under Onevest, there is a resources section there. And in the resources section, we have videos and materials that talk about making that decision that Chris was talking about. How do you go about it? We have personality assessments, that we do skills inventory, We'll give you a score on how compatible you are with people. These are all free services that are available to you on cofounderslab.com. And in particular, there's content that you can take a look at inside of the resources area. I'm going to take our next question that comes from Michael. Michael asks, when I think of setting specific goals, they must be narrow enough to be definable and accomplishable within a rather limited time frame. How can a startup in the early incubation stage define a clear, specific goal? Chris, would you like to take that one?
Absolutely. So it's certainly harder to define a clear and specific goal at the startup phase because there's so much uncertainty. If you're a big company, you can just say, we want this new line of Pringles to sell X dollars in the first year or to achieve Y market share. But it's still possible to really define things at the startup phase, even when things are unknown. For example, if you take a look at the concept of the lean startup by my friend Eric Ries, it's really all about finding product market fit. So that can be one kind of a mission. It'd be like our current mission is to achieve and demonstrate product market fit as determined by these criteria. The fact that you don't necessarily know how you're going to do that is not important. What you do know is the end state that you want to be in. And even at a startup, you can often specify these end states. And again, you want something that is short-term enough to be actionable. If you say our end state is the company's worth $100 billion, not much you can do on a day-to-day basis to start moving in that direction. You need to be a little more thoughtful.
Great. We're going to take our next question from Byron, who asks, how do you think that the co-founder who comes from complementary skills, tech versus business, is game for a startup? I'm
not sure I quite understood that.
Yeah, me either. Byron, feel free to submit a clarifying or rephrasing that. And we're going to take our next question. All right, from Robert, that says, excuse me, how can a startup recruit top talent? Oh no, we answered a similar question. Um, uh, okay. Paul asks, are there some ground rules to forming an alliance, Chris?
Sure. So in terms of ground rules, I think that the best way to think about forming alliances, it's all about being open, honest, and specific. And if you think about it, that's kind of the opposite of how we've tended to think about work, right? It tends to be dishonest because we ask people to pretend that they're going to be there forever. It tends to be closed off because we don't ask people about their true aspirations and what they're trying to get to after they work at our company. And it's vague because specifics are scary to us. It may reveal the fact that people will not necessarily be there forever. So when you're open and honest and specific, what you do is you turn it from sort of this adversarial, how do we reach some sort of agreement, I'm trying to negotiate the best deal, you're trying to negotiate the best deal, to putting both people on the same side and saying, okay, we know we want to try to work together. Let's figure out the way that gives us both benefits, a mission that matters to us both with specific outcomes that affect both of us and help transform both of us. So if you keep on thinking about the alliance not as a classic sort of, hey, I want to hit up the boss for a raise, but rather, hey, how do we together define the optimal outcome? I think that that helps you really get into the spirit of the alliance.
Great. And I didn't realize that I was doing some of this with my early, hires. But it was always, we were both on the same side of the table. It was, is this the right fit? Is this in the direction of your career? And it was always about, we're just a stop on your career. And
Right.
we want to make sure that it's in stream of where you're going. And can you build the right capabilities that you're looking for to move to 2, 3 plays ahead in your career?
Right. One of the people that we talk about in the book is LinkedIn's VP of Engineering, Kevin Scott. And one of the things that Kevin asks job candidates is, what's your job going to be after you leave LinkedIn? which is a pretty remarkable thing to say. Very few managers would have the fortitude to say something like that. But by doing so, he puts it out on the table and says, look, I know you're probably not going to stay here forever. How am I going to help you get to where you want to be? Let me uncover your actual needs and desires. Similarly, I just read in an article in The Economist this week that increasingly management consultancies ask the people they're bringing in, who do you want to be working for in 5 years? Because their goal is actually not necessarily, hey, we're going to have these consultants around forever. In fact, the vast majority of the people they bring in as associates are not going to end up staying at the firm in the long run. It's a pyramid. But what they want to do is they want to send those alumni out in the world to work for other companies so they can then turn around and hire their alma mater, so to speak, to do consulting.
Great, thank you. We're going to move on to, I like this question from Tucker that came in. Tucker asks, how can you make that great connection with new employees and really cement that relationship when starting a new company when you really don't have that much to offer them at first?
Yep.
And Chris, you want to take this one? I'd like to come after you on this too.
Absolutely. And then I'm afraid we're probably going to have to wrap up because we're rapidly approaching 11 a.m. and I do have to go. But this is a question that's near and dear to my heart. So it's very difficult as a founder because you don't have the money. You don't necessarily, if you're still at the idea stage, you don't necessarily have the traction and the promise of untold riches and so on and so forth. So ultimately, it is about that relationship, that alliance. You're trying to convince those people that you are the kind of ally that they want to work with. You're the kind of person that they want to spend their waking hours with. You're the kind of person who honestly wants to help them transform their career and whom they will enjoy helping transform the company. So I think that this is where, oftentimes people say they come and they start a company and they come around to things like culture and values long after the fact. No, 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 no. In fact, when you're starting at the very raw stages, your culture, your values, who you are is what you have to offer. And you should really think carefully about those, be able to articulate them. Because if you are, you'll be able to recruit the kind of people who are a good fit with what you're trying to accomplish, with the missions that you're going to send them on. And when you have that kind of fit, oftentimes people will choose that kind of meaning, that kind of relationship, even over offers of vastly more money by other companies.
That's great, and sort of that's you've mostly covered what I would wanted to offer here, and that don't underestimate what you have to offer. You're offering them a chance to make an impact. Their ideas can come to fruition in days and weeks and months, where at a large enterprise, as compared to startups, you can really see your impact really seen, and I think that counts for a lot. Being able to choose the people that come into the company, again, comparing startups to large enterprises, you really can control the environment a lot better and be part of the selection process. And I mean, after all, we are spending most of our time, at work together, and you might as well make that enjoyable. So I think you have a lot to offer at a startup. So it's a different currency. It doesn't show up, in your direct deposit with your paycheck, but there are currencies that can be unlocked. And I think the more you can articulate that to some of your early hires before you can pay market rates, the more likely you are to bring some of that talent in the door. We are going to conclude today's webinar on time here. We've got about a minute to go. I just want to take a moment to recognize Chris Ye for his tremendous work as a founder. Have a tremendous amount of respect for you, Chris, and congratulate you on all the success you enjoyed with your co-author, Reid Hoffman, and the book, The Alliance. One last plug here for Onevest. If you are building a team, come check out Onevest and cofounderslab.com. If you are raising capital and you think you're fundable, take a look at Onevest. We are an equity crowdfunding platform for tech-enabled startups. We'd love to see you apply. And if you are looking to invest in startups, you can also become an investor so long as you're an accredited investor as defined by the SEC, and you can create a free profile on Onevest as well. Please keep up with us by joining our newsletter at onevest.com and check out our events section, and we hope to stay in touch. Great. Best of luck with your adventures and building your own companies. And thank you again, Chris. Bye, everybody. Thank you for
No,
joining us.
thank you, everyone. Such a pleasure and such an honor to be here today.
Bye bye.